On this episode of Where's the Nuance, I'm joined by Wilkins. He's the creator of the really popular page Camden's World on Instagram, where he dives into the analysis of quantum spirituality, metaphysics, the evolution of consciousness, and more. He's a surface-level dropout and a deep-dive maestro, whose early childhood diagnoses of autism, dyslexia, and battle with depression left him feeling like a nobody. But through his tactical usage of psychoactive substances to help expand his consciousness, paired with mindfulness practices like breathwork, Camden was able to rediscover the depths of who he truly was, a nobody. Because the real self is the dynamic force of intelligence witnessing the propagation of the ego identity, which is but a set of neurological circuitry that convinces us of a past interpretation of self. That's his quote. He's brilliant, he's kind, and he is driven by a deep desire to be of service to other people. He's dedicating himself to sharing his insights about quantum spirituality, as well as building out the Saba Cooperative, a non-profit spiritual group focusing on incubating sustainable wellness communities. On this conversation, we dived into all the aforementioned topics and a lot more. This is a juicy conversation for any of you spiritual nerds out there. Enjoy. Welcome to Where's the Nuance with myself, El Niño. In a world of black and white thinking, we're here to introduce a little color and pull back the dogmatic ideologies that stand in the way of truth.
I love science. I just think it's incredibly pretentious and has claimed too much. Its methods are great. Its constipated conservatism is maddening.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
We can fight endlessly on the supposition that there are good guys and bad guys. When we fight on that supposition, there is no possibility of compromise.
Because we all step in shit from time to time. We hit roadblocks, we fuck up, we get fucked, we get sick, we don't get what we want. We cross thousands of could have done betters and wish that wouldn't have happened in life. Stepping in shit is inevitable. So let's either see it as good luck or figure out how to do it less often.
Wilkins, thank you so much for being on Where's the Nuance, my podcast here, where fundamentally I just try to bring nuance to seemingly black and white topics or introduce a broader awareness to these dialogues that I'm passionate about. Anything from psychology, spirituality, culture, sex, anything and everything. It seems like my curiosity doesn't really know many bounds these days. But Camden, before we dive in, if you had a short little intro about yourself, who are you? What's driving you right now? What is bringing you to the world of creation, conversation, and dialogue?
Sure. So two-part question.
Yeah,
definitely. So I'll give my bio. So my background comes from being diagnosed early on in my childhood with autism. My parents split at 5. A high school dropout. I was always the shy kid, kind of on the wayside, sort of bullied. Not having dad around, you lose a lot of qualities growing up, which I have a wonderful connection with my dad now, which has been part of my spiritual journey, sort of reorienting myself around the masculine energy and realizing that it's okay to be masculine, it's okay to be confident, it's okay to do those types of actions. And so I got into spirituality through sort of the effort to heal my mental illness with magic plant medicine and spirituality and just relentless mindfulness. And I think I had early advantages because I got into smoking marijuana through the pursuit of healing myself instead of using it recreationally or any of these things that can cause the deleterious type stigmatic effects that we see in our culture. And now I realize that it's just the education around magic plant medicine that is the critical structure that we need to create in the world to sort of help our people. Because if you can just snap your fingers and you're healed to the level of 10 years of therapy, then I think we should study that, look at that, make sure everyone's safe and so on. So I guess I'm kind of baking my mission and my drive into my bio. So is this rant kind of working for the question?
I love please, this is the podcast for ranting.
Okay, I love it. I dropped out of high school. That's a big theme because of the reorientation around education being on sort of now both sides of how bad it can be and how good it can be if we just find ourselves and realize that we can all be autodidacts. We can teach ourselves the trades and skills of the future. And just being an emotionally intelligent team member now can sort of open up opportunities anywhere in the world. And if you're a quick learner, which you can earn by just failing a bunch and learning how that works, then you can sort of do anything. So I just I had to reorient myself again around the masculine behaviors of discipline and will and triumph and things like this. So active kind of energies. And
Yep.
I had to trust myself. And one of my core tenets has always been, I don't want to live this life if I'm not living by my heart. So I had to listen to what my heart was calling me to do relentlessly, no matter what the parental structures or the world structure said. And it ended up working. So I'm here now, 27. It's been 7 years since I sort of started that journey. And yeah.
That's beautiful. I see. I guess it's no surprise that hearing this bio, I see a lot of myself in you a little bit. Just, that kind of idea of transmuting or, overcoming the very challenges that defined our childhood to become, more, I don't know, whole people. And it's funny, you echoed the relationship with your father, and like kind of, I don't know if that was just before, but I think masculinity has been very huge for me in my own life because, this past year I've had very healing relationship with my father. 2 years ago it was so dramatic, like the kind of like, Dad, you don't know who I am. You've never spent the time to get to know me. And now, me and my dad talk almost every day. And ironically, it's healing the relationships in my personal life that have been so spiritually healing. And I think that you said something that is beautiful, but I want to, because this is the podcast for Nuance, I want to give a little bit of pushback, because I used to always think that, well, because I was able to learn things myself, like I went to Germany when I was 16 and I pretty much just taught myself my school education while I was away, just by reading the books and being proactive and using YouTube. And I always figured, oh, like, why does anyone need school? These systems are silly. Like, if I can be proactive and engaged in my own learning and I can be self-sufficient, why can't anyone else? And, I think sometimes that's a privilege of people who, not unlike yourself, who it seems like you're very intelligent and I don't want to gas myself up, but I've always been fairly intellectually minded. And I do wonder at some point, don't we need we need systems and support systems and institutions to elevate the learning of people who might not be so proactive and didactic in their learning and their capacity? Because like you mentioned with the father, I think at some point society has to also play roles, institutions have to play roles of the mother, the father as well. Because not everyone can be this like self-sufficient individual. Would you agree? Yeah.
Well, I think, yeah. So we're in a still evolving world for sure. Yeah. And part of my spiritual beliefs, just to the core of my being, has always been, I chose this experience. And my pain was the necessary sort of like terms and conditions for my dreams.
That's lovely. It's very yogic karmic of you, and like I just finished reading a few books by these Kriya yogis who I quite admire, and they talk a lot about that, right? How in our past how well we live in a causal universe, and both in the spiritual realm and in the material realm, and of course our soul isn't limited or bound by time in the same way that the material world is. However, in that regard, we have chosen this life because it's the compounding actions of all of our past lives, although past again is a limited construction because technically they're all happening simultaneously. But it is the action of all of these things that now manifest in the specific persona and this life that we're living to clear out or give us the potential and opportunity to, let's say, clear our karmic debt or fulfill the karmic relationships. So it's cool that you see that as well. Hey.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
And the way that I see it is, sure, my birth definitely carries a lot of privilege with it.
Yeah.
Just where I was born, the color of my skin, everything like that. Just the way that the world's mind is right now. But yeah. I think that's why service is sort of like the meaning for a lot of our existence, as maybe a progressed energy or something like that. Right. Someone who has been here a while, and I don't think it's so shocking or bad. Like that's why I want to be a dream maker. Like when the immense wealth comes along the way, perhaps, I will for sure give it all to the people, because it's the most exciting thing that I can create in my life, because it matters so much to me to just give somebody the tools and knowledge to live their dream instantly.
Yeah, I see you doing that online. See, you have a big. It's clear to me that you're community oriented, and that in regards to, let's say, money, you're somebody who I'd love to see more of those resources in your hands, because you're positioning yourself in a way that you can create and give resources to people to live more meaningful lives, embodied lives, conscious living. And I know that you have some resources online around it, and you even started something called Saba Cooperative, which is, by your definition, a philanthropic green project based intentional online and in-person network of communities unifying conscious creatives, educators, and passionate human beings from a variety of skills and dreams in order to solve all critical world problems threatening our future. Now that is a hell of a dream, and I admire it, right? Because you're essentially saying, let's start a cooperative that in some way can tackle all of the world's problems. And I love this because I just finished this book called Conversations with God, and it was very much focused on the political and economic state of our world in many ways through a spiritual lens. And I loved it because it introduced some potential solutions. And one of them was in regards to like visibility, because a big part of our world that allows this system to continue propagating itself endlessly is the fact that the people that are benefiting disproportionately from it can hide the ways in which they are benefiting from it, right? And they can sell the narratives by using media arms, lobbying powers, and politicians that they can buy to create the idea that, oh, we can't change this. This would be way too hard to change, and it would all go to disorder instantly. But I love, because when you go through your ideas that you've propositioned, it doesn't actually seem that crazy or that difficult in a way to change the world. And I'd love if you could perhaps give us a few ideas that you've introduced within the Saba Cooperative.
Yeah. So one of our core, I guess, pillars, I like that word, or verticals, whatever, is the resources and people necessary to change the world already exist out there. So we can give everyone a home. We can rehabilitate the mentally ill, houseless people with magic plant medicine and things like this. So immediately eradicating the problems that maybe the average person might immediately start thinking about, like, oh, we're just going to shove a bunch of homeless people together and it's just going to be a crack filled area. Well, no, because we go to the whiteboard, we crack the critical world problems, we face it until it's gone, because there's a disproportionate amount of human suffering to abundance and wealth that already exists out there. So that's where these little template ideas come from. The micro food truck, where we instantly teach you how to turn around a food truck. Go to a few festivals every weekend and just earn $750 to turn your life around, and royalties go to whoever touches that project. So with Web3 or crypto, smart contracting, whatever, you can link all that together and ensure everyone gets the value that they put into the project. So
let's say, because this is the nature of this podcast, why would we incentive? Where's the incentive in this? Humans are only driven by self-interest, aren't they? Why, when we can live in a capitalist system with unbounded opportunity for me to make money, and I could become a billionaire by owning my own means of production and exploiting a cheap labor force, why wouldn't I do that? What's the incentive for someone like me to move? Or perhaps are you suggesting that this is only possible if people like me change their consciousness? How do we tackle this reality that a lot of people are in fact motivated purely by economic gains, and they have no interest?
Well, so there's a lot of answers to this. The more spiritual I get, the more connected with myself, the more I acknowledge the advantages that I have. I'm innately drawn to give it. So that's where I see human consciousness going, is that the strongest supporting action for the individual is for the whole, because we can get everything done faster. Everybody is happy. Nobody's angry. Everything can go smoothly, and we can, become more intelligent, and we can change our leaders, change the laws, and We have the technology, we can save him, we can save the world. And I don't know, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, or not unpack, but like dive into any one of those.
No, I love that. And you mentioned that the more that you've become, let's say, aware, the more that you've broadened your consciousness and your spiritual development. Firstly, how have you done that? What have been some of the most meaningful practices that someone might be able to engage with and to do that?
Yeah. So it requires a bit of an obsession. That's the accelerating force, because if you're obsessed with it, you have basically more brain cycles spent on introspecting into yourself to sort of grok the universe, grok where your consciousness comes from and what makes up your thoughts and navigation of life. So anything to do with investigating the summation of your experience will lead you to profound insight that can transform your path. So the more, I mean, I'm realizing that love is the smartest action. It heals, it generates, and anger takes, it stops things. And even on the other side of that spectrum, perfection, calling something perfect or trying to attain perfection is actually contradictory to the laws of the universe, because we're perfectly imperfect. We can only ever change. And when we stop, we find disease, because the process of healing and evolution and generation is being resisted.
You said something there that I'd love to touch on, which is that the criticism of perfection. And I think it kind of reflects the fact that, well, we live in a constantly dynamic or evolving system, both in the material world and like as evolution, it's always it's in a dynamic flux. And perfect kind of implies like a bounded state. It implies like a rigidity to it, right? But imperfection lies in the fact that we live in a dynamic state, and it's by embodying that dynamic imperfection of the universe, of nature, of Mother Nature, whatever language tickles your brain or suits your ego, that is a closer reflection of the connotation behind the word perfect that we're grasping towards. And I think that's always very funny that a lot of our language, we have these words like perfect and good and bad, and I get what it's trying to get towards, but the paradox is always like, well, it lies somewhere in the acknowledging that that's not a reality. Like somehow, right? Like acknowledging the non-duality of the universe gives you the peace you were looking for by striving to always be good, or when you let go of the need to be perfect, well, then you truly find more perfection, let's say, in your life. Or when I surrender to discipline, I find more freedom. And it seems to me that the universe has a paradoxical existence or set of laws within it. And I think you made a video on this, and I'd love to hear your kind of perspective on that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that was beautifully well said. So essentially the way that I understand it, to the furthest that I've ever investigated, is that existence itself and awareness was born from a set of initial paradoxes. Mm-hmm. So we cannot be aware of the lack of awareness. So when the body falls away, there must always be something to be aware of, because the lack of awareness is only ever retrospective, right? Our life is the contrast to the infinite death that was before us, which in a way we're used to death more than we are life. But if life is 50% light and 50% darkness, then we see the duality of life, and we are an expression of that. This existence is the furthest and newest thing of the expression of infinity, an attempt to sort of dwell within a satisfying shot of experience within eternity with godlike abilities at your disposal. So the paradox is it's a way that our psychological mind, which unfolds through gravitational space-time, can understand it.
That's amazing.
And communicate it, right? We're using air, it's vibrating your ear hair, and your brain is doing electrical things, and you can understand it. But that's initially an etheric concept, that exists prior. Best of my ability to explain.
I love it, man. And in perhaps more poetic language, I'm always like, well, it's like you are God expressing itself, because God is the infinite awareness of everything. And somehow the universe began when an infinite awareness that existed in some primordial state, I call it a state of love, decided out of a loving of itself, it wanted to experience itself totally, So it began to fragment itself infinitely through time because it wanted to rediscover itself. Because I like the expression, were God playing with themselves. God wanted to play with themselves and get to know itself all over again, because it was already existing in total awareness. And then perhaps that is reflected in the material universe in a infinite contraction and expansion of the universe, and multiple perhaps universes that are infinitely overlaid on top of each other, and they're infinitely exciting and interacting. And that's why breath for me in my own life has become a pillar for grounding in my awareness. And I go, oh yeah, of course it is, because it's in a way symbolic of the process by which the entire universe is going through, and a contraction and then an expansion. So yeah, I like that. I like those ideas a lot, man. You talk about psychedelics, and I know you kind of glossed over it in your introduction. You talk about the fact that when you started using psychedelics at 18, or marijuana is technically considered psychoactive, it was for therapeutic purposes, and that you had been dealing with diagnosis of early autism, dyslexia. Why was it?
And depression was definitely a main pillar of that.
And depression.
Depression has been sort of the main, the sweeping illness of my life. Gotcha. Which I have only recently completely eradicated, and I'm happy.
Congratulations, Camden.
Thank you.
There's something so crazy when you're no longer depressed and you've been depressed, and you're like, yeah. That is not a state that I have to exist within.
It's a new reality.
Literally. So in that respect, what were the conditions by which you suddenly started using marijuana, and then what other experiences have you had with psychoactive plants, and perhaps can you impart us with a bit of wisdom that you've taken away from them?
Sure.
Thank you.
So yeah, the way that I got into it was very fortunate. I was oriented towards trying to heal my brain, whatever that was, whatever my concept was at the time. It was trying to get my mind right. And my core of this was a game called Rocket League. And it's where you're this car and you bump a ball into a net, and it's one of the most popular games in the world. And it perfectly mimics real world physics. So it's actually like you have a rocket powered car and you're doing these crazy things. And the motor sense is akin to learning to skateboard or the violin or any of these things. So I became deeply fascinated with the science of learning. What is it that my fingers can now do that makes my imagination appear on the screen or in my reality? And I learned about muscle memory and the neurology of all these things. And when I would be under the effects of marijuana, it just made me better at video games. It made me better at anything that I was doing. And the way that my mind was starting to build, I was starting to think about these things. And then the substances like clicked me up into higher levels of enlightenment, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. And I just became fascinated with why that is. And I found corollaries in ancient traditions of spiritual awakenings, such as the Dukkha Nanas, which is in Buddhism. It's sort of like a map of how the psychology begins to look and your orientation of consciousness along the path of ascension. So just deeply fascinated with all of that. You could call it a cherry picking, but all these, floating participles came together for the network of my own subjective experience of enlightenment, which shows itself in enough areas in my life and with such a quality that it's undeniable that the effects of a small amount of magic plant medicine and ancient spiritual practices of deep introspection and body development lead to a better and more enhanced modern lifestyle.
I love that. I'm in total agreement. I was fortunate enough to start using psychedelics extremely young. I was 15 years old when I began using magic mushrooms. I was 13 when I was smoking weed, albeit I wasn't necessarily introduced to them by a means of, well, I guess actually you could argue, yes, in fact, I was trying to help my mental health because I was looking for an escape from my own anxiety and depression with some kind of substance that could alleviate the pain that I was carrying from a lot of early childhood trauma. And I was fortunate enough that those same experiences started to give me a potential understanding that perhaps I was subjectively extremely limited in my current framework of reality, and that limited perspective was perhaps in part why I was so anxious and depressed. And then like the unbridled curiosity and obsession that you mentioned grew within me as well. And you're so right that there is a kind of like, I hold a lot of like Wow, I'm so lucky because I also know people who went through, let's say, similar drug experiences, and it was clear that they weren't getting that impact or effect. You know, perhaps in some slight way they were like, "Whoa, that was trippy," but I didn't necessarily see a huge contemplative after effect occur in their lives. And you posted a video and recently around, you propositioning that psychedelics could be this incredible tool, and I wanted to give pushback, not because, again, in my personal life they've been fundamentally powerful tools for me to use with intentional acts. Like like I'll meditate for like 5 hours off like 5 grams of mushrooms, but like for very like intentional purposes. However, I want to give a little bit of pushback to that idea because that's what we do here. I think perhaps that a lot of times people will, because now there is this emergence that psychedelics can be beneficial in stories like your own and stories like mine. And I think a lot of times that's a sexier idea for people who don't want to go to therapy, go to the gym, build better habits. They think, I can just go to an ayahuasca ceremony, pay a few grand, go to the jungle, have this adventure of a lifetime, and then I can go back home, change none of my habits, and seemingly identify my ego with the idea of enlightenment. And then these people, I think, become quite honestly worse off than they were before, because now their ego, their sense of self, has attached itself to the idea of being enlightened, which is now an even harder place from which we can actually, like tackle the fact that you're not perfect, that you're not enlightened yet, and that you actually do have trauma that you're reenacting unconsciously in relationships, etc., and so forth. Do you find that that's a real potential, conflict that where we might come into play with the emergence of psychedelics? And do you have any ideas on how we might deal with that?
Yeah. So I think it takes souls like us, we're clearly here to mentor, to guide, to affect, to influence people through our story and frankly our intelligence and emotionality. And you're right, there is sort of a spectrum of intelligence on the planet. There's a spectrum of life experiences. Everyone's here for a different reason, but I think we can create the education and the eradication of the stigma relatively easily just by that's what I'm trying to do.
Yep.
I'm trying to say this is what it can do. And in speaking with sort of I guess I don't know how I would put it, but maybe a toxic / bad actor type person.
Yeah.
Very quickly, if with kindness and logic and just ease and peace and rationale, they flip, and you find their their true self, their pain, and it comes out, and you can have a conversation. So it's this weird membrane threshold of the mask and the average person and their experience and how we think about the entire world that I find very interesting. So I've personally just leapt into, well, what can I do? How can I help people realize these things? And it's worked. So that's just what I dedicate my life to.
I love it. Just make it come back to yourself and well, what can I do to help people? Again, you're coming back to the service element, which I think is beautiful, man, that you have that value, really. And in that respect, we talk a lot about self-realization in our own content, and I think perhaps we share the idea that, at some point self-realization is, the awareness that I'm the totality of the universe and expressed in an individuated space and time. And that's what I'm experiencing. But through practices, I can broaden that awareness and connect to something deeper and more expansive than my limited life frame. However, you talked about story and how we're using our stories to connect with people. And I was recently challenged by a friend of mine who said, she was criticizing the fact, I guess, that I share my story online, because she's like, well, that's just another narrative you're making up. And I said, well, yes, I'm aware that it is a narrative that I've constructed, just as I'm teaching people about the fact that I once constructed a narrative that I was a huge victim and my life, I was the bitter receiver of trauma, and I wasn't an active creator of my life. And I'm hoping that, yes, through, again, I guess, a creation of a different narrative, that they can see that they have the same power to, re-empower themselves. And because I'm not necessarily individually attached to the story I tell online. I'm like, I really do try to just live presently, but I still see the value of storytelling. How do you navigate living presently, letting go of stories, because ultimately, well, that's, a big core of what we're trying to do in spiritual living, but also going online and sharing your story and using that as a tool for helping people. How do you navigate that?
So so how to navigate which part specifically?
I guess not getting wrapped up in your own story, given the fact that you are engaging in storytelling again and again, for means of helping someone.
Right.
Or perhaps this isn't something that's really come up, honestly.
No, it's just it's deeply interesting.
Yeah.
So
Good.
yeah. So I mean, I'm here to play. I'm
Yeah.
all about jazz. I'm all about mimosas on the beach, hanging with friends, whatever. Just chilling. Like, this is life, man. I'm witnessing creation. So there are people out there who aren't experiencing that, and crafting these articulation slash artistic, educational, sci-fi, whatever pieces. I feel like I can just I've always been obsessed with trying to snap somebody awake. I know people are like, no, it can cause a lot of psychological whatever, but like, they were predisposed to that anyway. There's a lot there. So, and freedom of speech and whatever. So I'm just trying to help people. If they felt my heart, they know it's honest. So I don't really care. And I just want everybody to have a good time and realize we're here intentionally, and our world's going through this incredible evolution. And I just see so much potential with AI. I know people think it's going to kill us, but that's why I'm an optimist, so that's, I guess, my story is, I want to create my character around a core of optimism, because that motivates me into inspired action, and it works. And I think it's scientific to a T. Positivity generates and reinforces and uplifts. And yeah.
How do you stay optimistic in a let's say you live in a politically hot and divisive climate right now in the United States, and you also perhaps were being told that there are these climate disasters and a lot of global issues facing our world. How do you stay optimistic in regards to also holding awareness of these ongoing events?
So I feel like, subconsciously, I've become enough of myself to where I can thrive wherever I go. So I feel as though I'm an asset to any team. And that's because I've instilled these values of humanity and humility. And I live by that. So wherever I go, I'll be fine. So why not be optimistic? I can run on very little money. I don't eat a lot. I can just kind of drift wherever. And, the content is cool. It's opened a lot of doors and opportunities. So that's how personally, how I feel. But anyone can achieve that. All of those things are just a character trait or disposition that we can immediately start implementing. And it's amazing what it can do.
How do you said it's a trait that anyone can immediately start implementing. Now,
Yeah.
I love these ideas, right? About the idea, like we're not like beholden to a narrative you were telling yesterday. Like, part of that brain, its power is like, you can just change it today or this very moment. You can be born anew, born again in every single second. What about people? I know you talked about trauma, and obviously you've had your own degrees of trauma. How can we both balance the fact that you can come anew and you can live presently and you can, learn to engage with the world in a new perspective, while also recognizing the fact that, well, trauma does hold emotional weight and bonds in a way that if you just pretend it's not there, it can often then just become repressed and express itself more harmfully in unconscious ways. How might we deal with that reality?
Living by truth.
Hmm.
The truth. It's an instinct deeper than the creation of our ego. In fact, the creation of our ego or our character or whatever is in the imagination. It's post that awareness, which influences and manifests and creates it. And it's a habit. And the more that we live by the truth, the more we see the contrasting behaviors and mindsets and ill ways of looking at the world that are not in resonant with the truth. And I think when we start to intentionally heal, it digs up everything that's trying to resist the embodiment of our fullest self, which is that light, which animates our body and wiggles our fingers and, makes this guy right here and you and everything.
I love that. I love it. Yeah. So essentially, to restate that, and you can tell me if I kind of touched it right. It's like your primordial state of awareness didn't have that narrative or anything constructed upon it. It was already like this loving light, let's say, and in fact coming to that truth and living out that truth will inevitably bring all of the things and parts of yourself that are resistant to the light of consciousness, and then of course through intentional healing of that, well, then it'll gain less power over you, and you'll be able to then live and embody that truth more authentically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. You said, yeah, you have I think you have a lot of thoughts around how we can weave ancient sciences and modern understandings in order to transform planetary health and education. What is what's a vision that you see in regards to renovating our public education with re-emerging shamanic wisdom?
Mhm. Definitely healing our communities. There's a lot of anger, hatred, and pain. So I think we can start there, because we're going to need to work together to transform education, right? It takes a village to raise a kid. And I was an only child, and I don't know my neighbors. So, creating fun little systems like that, where you can go off to the engineer area and explore that. And there's ambassadors who watch over the development of our next generation, and whoever's in the program, just alternative ways of education, and targeting the inconsistencies of emotionality in our society at wide. So I think one creative idea is just start a solar punk community. I mean, it educates everybody as to how to survive, educate themselves, and you still have internet access and Wi-Fi, and you can learn anything that is to be known.
What is a solar punk community for anyone who's
Sure.
perhaps not super?
Yeah. So solar punk, I wouldn't call myself a solar punk. It's an idea where we can mingle biomimicry and food forests with technologies like solar panel and alternative electricity, to instantly create communities that are probably a 17th of the cost of anything in America, at least right now. And so their ideology is community working together. Everyone's intelligent and knows how to do everything, so they're not sheep led by some leader who's misleading them. So everyone's empowered by the education that technology disposes, and what we can do with modern minimum viable housing and stuff like that.
What are some of the books that you've been reading recently that have captivated your interest the most? And is there anything from them that you think could be pivotal or very beneficial to anyone listening?
So I've only ever read 3 books in my life.
Shut the fuck up.
I'm not even joking.
Get the fuck out of here, dude. What?
I told you I'm a cherry picker.
No shit. What have you read?
I just pick from all. What's that?
What have you...
So Power versus Force, which is that spectrum of human consciousness that I like to flash in my videos, and Prometheus Rising, and The Eye of the Eye, which is by the same author as Power versus Force.
What are some takeaways from Power versus Force that you can kind of impart with us here? Since it's one of the only 3, I have to imagine you know pretty well.
But I read it 7 years ago and I haven't touched it since. So I draw from the essence of it more than anything else, because I'm all about the practical applicability of these things and the subjective experience. So with that spectrum of consciousness, it gives me a map of my feelings and a look at the spectrum of our world and where other people's minds are, and just that it's a real thing. And there's like sort of a confident humility that needs to be, because it's like you don't want to label yourself with a number on that thing, like, oh, I'm 700 myself, because it's like it's just kind of weird, So it's like, it's a way of looking at the world that I found extremely interesting. It's sort of like you were saying, the mix of ancient science with modern wisdom and things like that. So it's like a clever look at it, I would say. So.
I love that. It's just great, man. I really enjoy just listening to you talk. It seems like a lot of from what I deduced, then a lot of your analyses have literally just come then from logical observations of your interior world. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't say totally.
No,
because from various YouTube videos and a Reddit comment and like a hidden document that no one's ever seen, like online, that I just randomly happened to stumble across, because like I'm an internet junkie. Like I basically grew up in my room on the internet. I haven't been out of my house within a 6 mile radius in 17 years. And so like I'm under socialized, but and hyper intellectualized. And it's just this interesting thing. So
Under socialized and hyper in the intellectualized.
yeah,
That makes
definitely.
for a good Instagram caption right there, my friend.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have a question then in regards to that. Do you think that, because the label that you were given, autism, how do you now sit with that understanding, given that you've shifted away from a very materialistic lens? And my personal grievances with psychology, which is what I studied, is that it is a fundamentally limited perspective of the human psyche and the truth of what we are. How has your perspective shifted now in understanding your own personal diagnoses?
That the symptoms were not my fault,
Hmm.
and that they were because of our culture. And I guess because I was sensitive, I've always been sensitive. I'm sensitive.
Me too.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. I always had it was weird why people were the way that they were to me. And I think it's because I was in touch with that emotion. And I lost the question, I think.
Just when you were, you were first given a diagnosis, and obviously that had
Right.
an impact on how you understood yourself. But you've been on this amazing contemplative journey of re-understanding consciousness, and obviously in part, I'm guessing your own consciousness. How has then that understanding of your original diagnosis changed?
Right. So yeah, the symptoms were not my fault. They were from the culture, a still evolving species, and there's no way to unpack that when you're 10, or 5, when your
I
parents
mean,
split and
if you're,
you just hate
yeah.
life. So it's only until the brain develops and you can retroanalyze these things that you realize that that they're cultural symptoms and things like that, and misinterpretations. And a lot of autism, like obviously it's not every case is going to be a starseed, like hyper intellectual, whatever, or really good at the piano but can't talk, stuff like that.
I love that. Yes, in my own understanding, because I think like my older brother's he's definitely on the spectrum. And like I mentioned earlier, there was a push by some teachers in my elementary school to perhaps, get me tested just to see. But my mom was a little bit resistant to that. But I remember that one of the earliest, this is again retroactively learning about autism, that autistic children often feel like everyone else is keeping a secret from them. Like they would, and that's actually was very emblematic of how I felt as a little kid, where I was like, it seems like everyone has a secret. Like everyone agreed that there was a certain way to socialize, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I was lucky because I always said that I was very obsessed with the human condition from since the moment I was conscious. It seems like I wanted to understand why humans were the way they were. And perhaps that unique obsession is what then gave me then I developed social skills very well. And I developed I used to watch Charisma on Command, all throughout high school, because I wanted to understand what these human behaviors were and how I could enact them in a way that would benefit me. But it never came necessarily natural, which people are surprised about, I guess, now. But yeah, I guess I wonder if that kind of resonates with you a little bit, of feeling like an outsider observing social behaviors as opposed to being within it.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I never knew how to interact, and I didn't have my thing. I didn't really like anything early on. There was nothing I wanted to talk about. And I felt like a nothing.
Oh, damn, man. That must have been difficult. But it's weird because now we're not weird, but it's amazing to see now that you talked about play and how you embody play. And I love it. That's very Alan Watts of you, I love it. One of my biggest realizations from a psychedelic experience was from DMT. I took more than I would ever recommend to any human do. Thankfully I didn't go crazy. But my biggest thing I took away from, I got up when I came back to consciousness, and I told my friend, I said, you might as well just dance. And he was like, what? I'm good. I don't want to dance. I was like, no, if you're going to try and spend your entire life trying to intellectualize the nature and scale of the universe, it's kind of a fool's errand. So you might as well dance. And for me, that has been the truth that I've kept now in the last year and a half around look, I love these intellectual conversations. I love all of it. I think there's value in it. But at the end of the day, you got to have a little play, man. You got to be willing to dance to the tune and the rhythms of life. Otherwise, I think you can lose sense of yourself here. How has play impacted your own experience, your own journey, and how do you bring that into your own life?
Sure. So speed learning, practicing competitive video gaming and seeing mad results, just the way that I was looking at it, with the plant medicine and everything like that, just wicked fun. I mean, it's thrilling to become insanely good at something, and I'm not trying to brag.
No, brag,
like
dude, please.
I mean, the stats are there, and it's just, it's real. It's not like I'm high, I think I'm better. I'm insanely better, and this is phenomenally interesting. So that's where play started for me, and a relationship with failure. Like a mistake is information entering our body, and it's just upgrading us, right? Even to wiggle my finger, I can wiggle it again and focus very finely on moving it very slowly. And the more that I do that, the slower I can make it. That's a permanent structure in me. So I became obsessed with the electrical creation of skills, perceptions of reality, the modulation of my psychology, and seeing what we're here for more than survival. Because even a golden retriever can enjoy a sunset. And that's incredible. Every single day they just watch the sunset. It's a beautiful thing for something that we think is like leagues below us in evolution, but it's really one of the most fullest embodiments of unconditional joy and happiness. So what is the golden retriever? Sorry, there's a bug. What is the golden retriever life like, and how can I match that? And I think touching that will touch the reason for being and happiness. And joy is a skill, right? We have to get better at creating situations where joy is experienced. And you can pick up a rock, make up a game, and make and share that with a couple of kids, and before you know it, you're killing an evening just filled with joy. So play should be a center, almost a center focus of life, and still acknowledging the critical thinking skills and taking mature, dedicated, disciplined action, but kicking all the stress off from that with play.
I love that.
Makes sense.
It does make a lot of sense. For someone who, let's say, reminds you of a young you, they're hyper intellectual, they're depressed, they are critically analyzing the state of the world and perhaps themselves, and they don't feel like they're enough. They feel like, what's the point? Mm-hmm. What's a word of advice? What's something that you can perhaps impart to them to help them realize the wisdom of the golden Labrador watching a sunset?
Microdosing psilocybin and breath work. Just making the body feel good, making the mind feel good, having instant experiences that completely change your worldview, because they have a gift. It's just trapped behind all the gunk that we receive over decades from the society around us. That's in us as these structures. The fastest way to delete it and approach it is microdosing psilocybin and just being consciously oriented towards your introspective development. And eventually your intellectualism will channel into some artistic craft, your speech, the way that you look at the world, any of these things. It will satisfy your fleshes. And that's what I would have told my younger self. Yeah, smoke a little bit of weed, play video games. You're excellent. You're amazing. You're doing fine. It's not your fault. This is the path for you. Welcome. I mean, that would have sped everything up. I would have overcome hurdles a lot earlier, but it was necessary to go through to have the fullest context of my younger self and potentially other experiencers in this world to help them with a finer nuance.
It's beautiful, man. Yeah, I always find myself, there's parts of myself where I go, oh, I wish I could go back and just tell him he was enough and tell him he's fine and I love him and all that stuff. But then I'm also like, yeah, but you're here, and the culmination of every one of those experiences and the fact that you did feel lacking and the pain that you carried and the way that you tried to navigate that pain is what led us to this present moment. And you get right, and that's a right, like I try to balance that. Like, it's good to acknowledge that perhaps that stuff is positive, and I want to encourage younger people to embody those things that could have helped me a little bit, but at the same time not falling into a pattern of regret and culminating around a past that never even cannot happen because this is the only thing that's happening. But yeah, that's right. That's so beautiful, man. Lastly, you have a video. I kind of touched on in the beginning, but honestly, it's like I just love that video. Could you explain to us how you see the evolution of humans from, material being towards luminous beings?
Mhm.
Because you understand it incredibly well, and I think people would benefit from listening to you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. So yeah, we are the light, sound, God, vibration, source, whatever. It's all the same thing. And this is I'm noticing this now. Your poeticism with explaining it, and then like I sort of have like this other, I don't know, like Legos. I don't know how to
Mhm.
explain it
It's
or
like an
whatever. And it's
analytical, yeah,
sure,
yeah.
yeah, and that's fascinating. So thank you for that tip for into the world. Um, so yeah, we are light, we're source vibration, that is evolution, that is awareness, intelligence, emotionality. Right, the highly vibratory spirit is someone who is highly vibrating this nervous system. They're a more sensitive instrument, they're more powerful, they're emanating, and this light starts to become damned by our fleshes, and certain misconceptions of the nature of reality, our self, and our reason for being. So it's a fundamental disconnect with the source of our generation and liveliness that causes diseases. So the transition into the Homo luminous is one who has fully acknowledged every metaphysical aspect of our life and is slowly incorporating it into their daily actions as a human being to most fully support this environment to become more radiant, intelligent, emotionally in touch, on purpose. They call it the ikigai. It's like the center convergence of these four circles where your eminence, your spiritual purposes is going into the world. It's spilling out from you into the world, and that's coming back to you circularly as opportunities, which we might call finance or abundance, and things like that. So yeah, I don't know what that will look like exactly, but along my path, I've had an incredible glow up, I guess we could call it. It's an apt term for it. And it blows my mind. Like and it blows my mind the level of effect it has, just acknowledging the source, just trying your best to incorporate it in any way possible. And so that's what we're going to see in our world. Everyone's going to unify because that's the strongest and smartest action, and there will be no hatred and pain. And I know when that is said, it's sort of like a hedonistic flair, or some people might interpret it as impossible. We'll never get to utopia or whatever, but I really believe that we can enter a golden age. That sounds like a real thing. And if we all get along and get together, we can use technology in combination with the human spirit to ensure that everyone and every being on this planet is enjoying their existence on it.
That's beautiful. You mentioned earlier that some of the ways that you're incorporating moving towards that evolution towards the Homo luminous,
The
I think
Homo luminous, yeah.
Homo luminous,
Mhm.
is microdosing and breath work. Are there any other skills or things that you might recommend to people to do?
Yeah. So I could go into any one of these, but like off the top of my head, yeah, breath work. Well, we could call it pranayama because
Yeah.
there's like 15, 20 different practices under breath work that you could learn, and they all have a different effect on the nervous system. So a general orientation around, I'm affecting this nervous system. It's generating my subjective experience. What can I do to my body to support its function? And it sounds rudimentary and simple, but that literally creates more light. Your cells explode into each other more, creating more light, and you emanate that. So cold temperature therapy, for specifically for inflammation, and sort of a look at discipline. It's sort of like the science experiment of spiritual introspective practices, like the volcano experiment in third grade. It's a look at the sciences of our body and the subjective feeling of it, including discipline, which is psychological and physiological. You're getting yourself to do a hard thing. You're reaping the rewards. It's modulating your subjective experience. Look for the things that you can do to your body to get more of that, and you're on your way. Because you'll just develop a subjective intuition of the functioning of your body, how to help and heal it, and you'll just kind of be that way as an existence. You're like you'll notice every little thing about yourself, and it just compacts into the wisdom. But I guess another practice would be some sort of creative channeling, or developing some kind of motor skill every single day. gets you in touch with your physiology, the mindset necessary to approach mistakes and failure, which increases the speed of the electrical creation of your paradigm and everything else like that. So just find the micro difficult things you can every single day. Realize it only takes 5 minutes to create a new permanent structure in your brain that will help you in your daily life. And don't be so hard on yourself, because if we're adding stress psychologically to the stress that's necessary, we'll have a bad relationship with all of that stress instead of just half of it that we can manage their behavior.
I love that. My Kriya yoga teacher, Ryan Kurzak, talked about how, he talked about how, a lot of people will come to spirituality looking for a big answer, or like, because they're highly neurotic, and he goes, these people need to go see a counselor, because now they're just going to become neurotically involved with spiritual practice. That doesn't help you. At some point it's like you do have to be present in these practices. If you're doing a practice still neurotically engaged with, I need to be doing this because of that, it kind of like there's no, the benefit that you're looking for isn't quite there. And personally, I would recommend to anyone listening or watching, you really do need a multi-tiered approach. You can't pretend, if you have a diet that's horrible, right? And at the end of the day, you are also a biological being whose diet and microbiome affects your mental health and the capacity for your brain to function properly. You can't ignore that and then pretend that you're going to become more enlightened and more tuned to subtler states of consciousness when your physical body is not in a great place. Secondary, right? If you don't have a movement, right, like you talked about, some kind of physical practice, in my personal opinion, you are a human being. We're primates and evolved to move our bodies. If you are stagnant, you're also going to be limiting your capacity to really develop towards that luminous being and that luminous state. And of course, then obviously what we're hopefully focusing on or encouraging here is, spiritual practices that will help make the mind more attuned to subtler states of consciousness and to the subtle energies that that do exist in this universe, that we are fundamentally connected to. But like you said, we become disconnected from by many ways. Dr. Gabor Mate said, I like it because it's more like a surface language, but he was like, we as young kids learn to leverage our authenticity for acceptance, and we engage in that practice throughout our entire lives, and it moves us away from a state of authenticity. I truly believe that even people who are still not open to the ideas around metaphysics, they would still end up benefiting from simply recognizing that there is a more authentic self that wants to be expressed when they come back to their primordial, their inner child. That's where my inner Niño, that primordial state of awareness that existed before the conditioning. I just want to, finish this up, to be honest, Camden. What are you working on right now? I know we touched on this beginning, but what are you working on now? Where can people find you? What would you want people to take away from your time here on this planet that you've been,
take away from, wow. And thank you, by the way, and beautiful conversation. And
thanks.
It's amazing to be here and do this more. So Camden.live is where you can find the information on my nonprofit, everything that I'm educating on, want to do for the world. And that is transform education from the bottom up, teaching humanity how to be themselves and unlock their creative genius and all these things, because we deserve it and it can happen fast. So I'm just trying to be an advocate for that. In addition to that, I'm a co-founder of Saba Cooperative, where we are an effort to solve critical world problems like housing insecurity and food through these minimum viable micro ideas and community crowdfunding. So that we can do that right away, because frankly, solving world hunger is easier than we might think, and might only be like 3 years away.
Amen.
So,
I love what Musk said, which people love to just hate the guy, but it's like, we don't have a resource problem. We have a resource distribution problem. And that's right. That's been so evident for so long, but it's like, there's people and corporations who profit from the idea that, oh, no, we don't have enough, because it lets them, in that scarcity, they can create higher value and make more money, unfortunately. But that's awesome. You can find Camden Wilkins, that you are by your name online, right?
Sure.
Camden.Wilkins. That's your Instagram, right?
Camden.world.
Sorry,
Camdens.world, yeah.
Camdens.world. Thank you so much for coming on to Where's the Nuance. Thank you for being present with me. Thank you for sharing space. Thank you for sharing a bit about your story, and helping other people, because I mean, for me, connecting with your content has been a trip, because it's always an intellectual tickle, and I love being intellectually tickled, my man. And you have a gift for it. So thank you so much for sharing that with me and with the world.
Thank you so much, Niño.
I appreciate that.